leadership on these issues, and I want you to know this is a very important issue to me, combating anti-Semitism and human rights in general, and I will always try and serve as a partner to you in any efforts that you have in this regard. I want to thank the witnesses for their fantastic work that they've done with their careers and throughout their lives on these issues, and I want to welcome them here today. To make you feel welcome, I just want to say Bruchim Habayim and welcome you here to Washington today, and thank you for the work that you're doing again. I'm a former mayor and a county executive and very comfortable with the issues that you're talking about regarding law enforcement, having overseen a very large police department as Nassau County executive and a smaller police department as Glen Cove mayor, and know how important local law enforcement, both here in America and abroad, and the training that they receive on these issues is so essential. So anything that the chairman wants to try and promote in that respect, I'll be happy to support him in those efforts. It's important that we say on the record that the Jews have been persecuted for centuries, as all of you know, but it's important that I say it as well. And that, this is a persecuted minority. There are over 2 billion Christians in the world. There are 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. There are 900 million Hindus in the world. There are 376 million Buddhists in the world. There are 23 million Sikhs in the world. And there are only 14 to 15 million Jews. And when you think about the number of 6 million people annihilated during the Holocaust, what an incredible statistic that is. And the persecution that the Jews have suffered for centuries is something we have to start worrying about again today. And we need to look at what's happening in the world right now. There are other minority groups that are being discriminated against. And there's something that's happening related to the internet, something that's happening related to our political dialogue and the way that people treat each other generally in high public places and the way that they talk to each other with a lack of civility, and where it's become almost acceptable to demean people and to treat people with less than their human dignity. And I wanted to ask each of you to just tell me what you think is happening in the world today that we are seeing these rises happen. What are the factors that are contributing to this uptick in hate crimes? Certainly for Jews, certainly, but throughout our societies, throughout the world today. What's happening? Is it the internet? Is it that the people that were underground before, it's easier for them to express themselves utilizing social media? Is it because of leadership in the world? Is it because people feel threatened because of their economic circumstances? What is it that's happening in the world today that we see this uptick in anti-Semitism and other discrimination? Mr. Goldenberg?
Well, one of the things, and my distinguished colleagues could probably really elaborate more so on what I'm going to say, but I'm not looking to simplify it. But when I had the honor of working closely when you were county executive, I'm very aware of the good work you did out in the county on bias crimes and hate crimes.
Thank you.
Working with your police department. And as someone that actually was responsible for the prosecution and an investigation of these crimes at the state of New Jersey for the Attorney General's office, I'm speaking again through a different set of optics. Back in the day when we were investigating these types of crimes and we had leaflets calling for death to the Jews or Jews to the ovens, which are extremely heinous in itself, those words were leafleted at maybe 100 cars. And those that were distributing the leaflets would get tired and go back to their basements and go back to their disheveled printers. And I'm not making light of this by no means. Today, Congressman, with a single click of a finger, you can reach tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, some of which are now much more emboldened. They feed off of each other. But the old cliche, some say, well, the internet, First Amendment, sticks and stones will break your bones, but there are statistics to show that dozens and dozens and dozens of individuals who have been involved or engaged or have perpetrated murders tied to extremist views have done so because they were inspired through the internet. Stormfront, one of the most vile internet sites out there. Breivik in Norway, who killed dozens of children. Miller, who shot 3 wonderful human beings out in Kansas City. And our latest individual that just was found guilty for shooting nine wonderful souls down, taking out 9 wonderful souls in Charleston, South Carolina. The common denominator between them is they visited the same site. They visited the same site. So the old cliche, it's the best of times and the worst of times, because we have this wonderful tool.
Yeah.
But again, my colleagues can elaborate much more.
That's the point that Tom Friedman makes in his recent book, Thank You for Being Late, is that, the Internet makes this opportunity for makers to do great things, and for breakers, the people that want to try and take us down.
Well, you ask a real challenging question, because there is an uptick, and the why is really one I think we all wrestle with. It reminded me of something that goes back now, I think, almost 25 years. AJC at the time was doing attitude surveys in different European countries. We would ask how people felt about Jews as neighbors and so on, but about other minority groups too, to really try to get a more comprehensive picture, not only of anti-Semitism, but other prejudice and so on. And we were presenting them, I recall, one of these surveys done in Germany at a press conference in Berlin. And it was a pretty significant degree of anti-Jewish, but also anti-other group sentiments. I want to say ranging maybe from 20% up to maybe 80% in terms of the degree of negativity, depending on the group. And someone asked about such surveys at the time in the United States, and there have been. And what was interesting was the range of negative attitudes, the range itself was much lower. Maybe beginning at 5 or 6%, and maybe going up in the worst case to 20+%, depending on the group. And one of the Germans in this conference said, well, maybe as a way of explaining the more negative responses there, maybe people here are just they're just more willing to speak their mind, to tell you what they really feel, and that perhaps those surveys done in America, people were inhibited. They didn't want to say what they really felt. And it seemed like an answer, although at the time my colleague said, well, maybe that's true. But the first step, at the very least, is to make saying those things taboo. Even if you think it, you shouldn't feel free to say it. And it's always struck me, it's a basic lesson. It goes whether it's the old way of communicating in broadsides or just public speeches, or in the new means we have today, but it comes back to the same thing. We need to, at the first step at least, make sure these kinds of racist, xenophobic, anti-Semitic expressions aren't acceptable. And we all have a role in doing that.
That's an excellent point, Rabbi. Thank you.
I agree with what both my distinguished colleagues have said before, and I would say that, just to make it very graphic, when I remember one of the first articles I wrote about extremism on the Internet was for a conference at Oxford, I think in the year 2000, and I entitled it, "The Internet is More Powerful Than a Sword." And that was actually the message at that point that was taken from the writings of neo-Nazi online. They themselves saw it as more powerful. Actually, if we begin and want to take an understanding of this, Stormfront, which Paul mentioned, is basically credited with being the original neo-Nazi site online from 1995. Actually, the reality is, already in the mid-'80s, in the old dial-up BBS systems, we found a neo-Nazi site from West Virginia, for example, was one of the first online, and it became the prototype. It had a library of neo-Nazi writings. It had a list of race traitors, things of that effect on it. Point systems where people were already targeted, ranging from leaders of civil rights organizations, federal judges, Jewish leaders, et cetera, it was already an established theme by the turn of the millennium. So this has been prevalent ever since the technology began. And it teaches us that it's not the technology, it's the human beings involved with it. So what my colleague said, I agree wholeheartedly. I think that the sense of responsibility is something that is lacking. And I would also say, and add up to it, that I think one of the things that we allowed, and you made the point of political language becoming debased and very highly charged. Chairman Smith has referred to Natan Sharansky's remarks a couple of times already. I think what he was pointing out and talking about was how the criticism to Israel became hostility to Israel. Israel became identified and accepted as identification in certain elite circles, media circles, and so on, identified with Nazi acts, with an apartheid state, with an illegal state, with genocide, with concentration camps. And this was then extended to the totality of the Jewish people. The effects of the Holocaust were turned around, were inverted, where the victims became the perpetrators. So we have a system or a culture where in certain ways very highly emotionally charged language was used to create not just disagreement, but hate. And stereotypes were built into it. The opposition that Rabbi Baker mentioned to some of the traditional acts of Jewish religious practice, some of which were aimed, by the way, and I heard it firsthand from parliamentarians in Norway, for example, that these acts were aimed originally at the Muslim community there, and Jews were collateral damage that went along with it. But they reverted back to traditional stereotypes of Jews as blood-sucking, vampiric figures. And these were in mainstream newspapers. So we saw it entering the mainstream of society, and I think in essence what we're talking about is that anti-Semitism used to be marginalized. We used to think of it as the extremes. What we've seen in recent years is through political anti-Semitism and now through Holocaust distortion and other means, it has entered the mainstream of society with the effects that we see today where Jews throughout the world, particularly in the Western world, feel imperiled in ways that are really, frankly, unparalleled in recent memory. So I think the leadership question is major. I think the sense of responsibility in terms of political speech in general, anti-Semitism in particular, is very important. But I think the leadership, as shown by the actions of this committee and yourself, pave a way and a model that we hope more people will emulate.
Thank you.
So the question you ask is so perplexing because every public attitude survey that we see about our own country, you can look in Germany at a similar trend. The American people, the German people, people in communities are growing more tolerant of each other. More people in America today have favorable views of Jewish people than they have before, and that's true of other groups as well. But the hatred has such a microphone right now. It's hard to hear that tolerance. And I think, my colleagues have touched on a point. The internet is anonymous. Think about what it took to bring down the Klan. It's not that the people in Claverns believed our arguments that their values were, not as good as ours. It's because they had to take off their hoods and show their faces, stand behind that hatred. And our CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt, keeps reminding us that the people who used to burn crosses on front lawns are now burning up Twitter. And so my colleagues are right. It's just another platform for the same thing. There's anger, there's a vacuum of leadership, and we are all of us on both sides of this table, we're in a battle for an evidence and a decency-based marketplace of ideas. And it goes from the global level to a very personal level. If you shoot hoops in the congressional gym with someone from the other party, you're less likely to believe it the next time one of your colleagues tells you that that guy's group is out to get you or your agenda. I say guy because we're in the gym in this scenario.
There's women in the gym, too.
It could be. Oh, okay.
I worked out with some Republican women and men today.
Good for you. That's all politics is local, as you know from being a county executive. So your statements today, our visible partnership, communities see that. And when we can sit here as nobodies at a table and bring our expertise and give you a list of our ideas, and know that this chairman is quite likely to take all of the ideas and turn them into action and then some, that's a very powerful example for people to see.
Thank you very much.
We're on the way.
That image you gave of the idea of taking the hoods off of Klan members is a very good image, which is, transparency and exposing things. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, and that goes with all different things in government, but certainly on this issue, exposing the people that are behind these actions and talking about it publicly is so important, and that's why it's so important that the chairman held this hearing today and that all of you came. So thank you again.
Yeah, it just, and Mark, I think you stirred this a little bit. One of the things we did find in working across 10 countries, Andy and I traveled probably even more than that, and as well as Stacy and I, synagogues and Jewish centers in Europe have become lightning rods for what happens geopolitically. And that should not be the case. These synagogues, these precious, they're more than infrastructure. In some cases, 100 years old. In some cases, it could be 10 years old. These are the fabric of the nations where they sit. They're part of their fabric. And I think that is something that we cannot allow this continuum, even amongst the police ranks, to believe in some of these countries that if they're attacking a synagogue, it's got to do or associated with what's happening geopolitically 2,000–3,000 miles away, because that's not the case. What's happening geopolitically 2,000–3,000 miles away is happening 2,000–3,000 miles away. But there are those that will use that as an excuse. We have to keep reminding people, including the security services, the national security services, these are your houses. These are your institutions. These are your synagogues. These are your schools and your Jewish centers. And they need the same protection. They belong to you. And that's something that our collective groups are working on right now. More than a reminder, but that's about training. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just add, before yielding to Mr. Sherman,